I was reading through some of the original notes from Diraj, who brought through the Tibetan pulsing. And I never really understand them. I can't say I understand what he's talking about, or it seems very kind of complicated in a way, or in depth. But somehow in reading it or them, it just purveys the quality of the organs. And in this case, it was the duodenum. Whether he is one of the sources of what we're working with, I guess he is, or his work is. Whether it's connected to Diraj or not, I don't know. My guess is there's just a whole conflab of different sources and different energies. But I did, in reading it, I did experience a lot of the characteristics of the duodenum and its kind of central life force that goes through there. And there is quite a lot to do with our sexuality and life force in the duodenum. And blockages to our sexuality and life force, which are enabled through our lives, really. And a lot of that, as the sexuality is stronger in teenage years, it's also, well, I guess for women, I think apparently it becomes stronger a little bit later, but for men, definitely, or me, definitely strongest through the teenage years. I think it comes to fruition a bit later for women. Yeah, you know, you have to put me right on that. Someone can send me a message if I've got that wrong. But there aren't the tribal ceremonies in modern society that make sense of it. There aren't the rituals so much, and I don't know if it goes so undercover in tribal nature as it does in modern society, where it's almost, you can't be very upfront with it. You know, it's kind of psychic messages or little nods and winks, and and so a lot of it gets repressed in different ways. A lot of it is projected into the future of how you think it's going to be or how you want it to be, which is quite often fantasy based in early years anyway. You know, until you have had a few relationships and things. And it's also held by karma from past lives, religion, society, advertising, I never thought about this, but I'm kind of thinking as an expression, I had no idea this would come up, as an expression of the repression and unconsciousness of our sexuality, could be this new film that's come out. I think it's called Sound of Freedom, something like that, and it exposes the global pornography trade in young children. And it's not a small thing. It is, I think, the biggest financial kind of criminal trade, bigger than drugs, bigger than arms, and massive, just massive. And it goes completely undercover. People don't know that it's going on. Somehow people, except for the people involved in it, and apparently there's a lot more people involved than it would first seem. And I think that is so, and that people don't want to look at it. It's so traumatic. People don't even want to go there to see the truth of that. I haven't seen the movie, and I probably won't. But I've listened to the guy, the actual real life detective, giving quite long interviews about what happened. So I think that, and what's happened in the church, how it's all undercover and nobody speaks to it until recently. And again, this film, it may be an outcry. You know, the guy who made, who was the agent who went and did it, apparently was, he says he was called on by God. And I can kind of believe that kind of the angels came, or whoever, because there's this deep unconscious thing around sexuality, and I think that might be emblematic of it. The guy, the Hell's Angel, who became a Christian and went to Africa and basically was a mercenary going out capturing the child soldiers and bringing them back. He also felt guided by a higher power. So, you know, I think that it is unfolding in the global consciousness at the minute. And you have to look at the powers that be that seemingly don't want it to unfold. The mainstream media, they've had to start writing about it because it's the most popular film at the minute. But they're just running it down as conspiracy theory. And it's not in one single, or maybe in a few, I don't know, but apparently not in any main cinemas. It's just the little cinemas around. So there's, you know, there's a body of energy or a body of people that don't want it to come to light. So I think that is part of what we're working with, because there is definitely this stream of consciousness to do with the duodenum. And I don't know if it's a negative side. There is obviously healthy lovemaking and relationships. And it's interesting, this child pornography, there is just they are direct sex slaves, but there's also films made. And one of the aspects of the duodenum is masturbation, where you want to express that energy, and definitely in teenage years or out of relationships or in relationships. But it's a specific quality of masturbation. It's voyeurism. It's where your fantasy is about something happening to somebody else. And that is an aspect of the duodenum. Whether you think of that as a bad thing or a good thing or a healthy thing, doesn't really matter. It's part of that energy, and that kind of gets cleared when we work through the duodenum. And generally, with holographic breathing, all of the organs relate to our sexuality in some form or another. And as I might lose a lot of students by saying this, as we work through the karma of it, that energy that would normally be held in sexuality works through the body and connects to the higher self. So the reservoir of energy that becomes held in the organs becomes less in a way, or ventilated, or moving. So there's not this drive to, definitely young people perceive that becomes less. There is sexuality there, but it is a wider stream and not like, oh my God, I've got to do this and wham bam, it's over. I guess that's the male view of it. I guess there's a fairly similar one for women, but I guess women are much slower with it anyway and leading in a different direction. But that I've got to get laid or I've got to masturbate, that pressure becomes much less, and it becomes an interface with God, as it were, or the higher self, or the divine realms. So our sexuality isn't held to the genitalia. It's in different forms through all of the organs. So we are working with the kundalini as that energy rises, but we're also working with inner tantra of our inner male and female coming together. So that sexuality, that drive, that potency doesn't have to be expressed out. You don't have to get rid of it. You don't have this itch that you've somehow got to deal with. It just continually gets balanced and is circled in different ways. And this becomes a very potent force for transformation as the male and female inside of us in so many different facets and so many different ways interplay with each other. That releases through us and into the higher self. So it is an internal tantra that we are working with in holographic breathing, and a refined one. You know, as you noticed, it's not full of thousands of people here. It is I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't think it's everybody's cup of tea. It's not, we're not expressing ourselves outwardly. We're not doing catharsis. We're not doing the very active breath work. It's quite refined and working with different energies. So there is this primary and central energy of the duodenum. And on the downside, there are things like anxiety and worry. Anxiety and worry are major, I don't know whether you call those emotions or manifestations or whatever. There's this anxiety, worry, different things like that to do with the duodenum. And that manifests sometimes as a duodenal ulcer or something like that, where people worry or get into a lot of anxiety, and just by having a stress or a charge in the duodenum, it will just pull you into that emotion all the time, or maybe into masturbation, or maybe into voyeurism, or into accumulating wealth, anything to protect yourself, like money, working to make a protection. Rather, that, I'm not saying that is bad, but if it's used as an alternative to living your life, it's not particularly good. And then as that clears, there's a very Buddha-like quality, and we've felt it a lot because we work with all of the organs, all of the green energy. I've started calling this the green energy circuit. It's much simpler than saying the deep earth energy circuits, and Diraj has these organs as different colours of green, and that's also how I find them, either dark, almost black, to different shades of green. So to make things easy, I'm just calling it the green energy circuit. So I've forgotten what we're talking about, but anyway, there is this very Buddha as those things release, as the stress, the anxiety, the worry leave, then there's this Buddha-like quality. And for anxiety, for worry, you are projecting yourself out of that central column of energy into the future. You're never anxious about now or worried about now. You're always worried about something. It may only be a couple of minutes into the future, but it's in the future. So you kind of coming out of the now and out of this central thing, and that quality of worry continually pins events that you can be anxious about into the future. And these often we create them by continually running them through our mind or our consciousness. We actually create that framework for us to move into, and those things that we are creating, quite often they will be inborn in us from previous generations, from previous karma, from our mother, our father, womb life, birth, breastfeeding. And we're going to look at this central column of energy and the primordial, or I've forgotten the words, the archetypal male or female of the earth as the mother, the sun as the father, or the earth as the female, the sun as the male, and then male and female, and then within ourselves. And the men will have to imagine this in themselves as having a uterus, and the female the egg, and the sperm coming together to create a baby, and then the manifestation of the duodenum and the whole green energies, or green energy organs in the womb, and then how that travels through life. So I'm just going to change energy a bit, because I think I should talk about the anatomy a bit. In the last webinars where we were working with, I've forgotten the word, where we're in the womb, as we grow in the womb, we were working with the very young baby, and so if you've got a baby, you've got its head, you've got its tail, 2 or 3 weeks into gestation, there is a spine at the back, and then there's 2 long tubes which become the kidneys, the adrenals, the ovaries, testes, and different organs. And then you've got a tube at the front which can become the heart and different organs, but it's basically the GI tract. It's the kind of gut and intestinal tract, and at the top of that tube is the pharynx, then it becomes the esophagus, and it's just a tube. The different organs, parts of it aren't formed, it's just a tube. Then the next section will be the stomach, and then the next section will be the duodenum, and then below that will be the small intestines, and then you get the rectum, which is also joined with the genitalia and the bladder and urethra. So you just got this tube, and central in that tube is the duodenum. Before it all starts coiling, especially the small intestines where it just goes all over the place, you know, 2 or 3 weeks in, it's just a straight tube in the middle, and that is the duodenum. So that is there right from the very beginning, and it is part of this central feeling tube at the front of the fetus. And embryology, that was the word. Out from that grows the liver. It starts as a bud, and that starts growing into the liver, and then after a while it has a tube, and then the liver, and then the gallbladder grows out from that tube just below the liver. Then the pancreas grows out a bit from that tube on the liver side, and a bit from the stomach side. It grows 2 ways, the pancreas, and then everything starts turning around, and those 2, it all spirals, and those 2 come together. The 2 halves of the pancreas come together and create the pancreas. So all of the organs of the green energy circuit stem out of this central. I'm not going to go into the embryology in depth. I'm just going to give you a picture so you can see it in time, and then as we move through the experience of the womb, can imagine it growing and feel the energies of those different organs. but the liver, the pancreas and the gallbladder are all formed out of the duodenum and this initial central tube. And the duodenum is to do with this central life force. And as we clear the qualities, now the qualities may not be anything like I've described. I find it hard to put words on how I describe it, how I experience it. And I've mentioned some things how Diraj sees it, some things how I see it and feel it, but you may feel it in a totally different way, and holographic breathing may be totally different for other people other than me than Tibetan pulsing. It's just that I've got a long background in Tibetan pulsing, so you may experience so in a different way. So be true to your own experience, your own feelings of it. But it seemed to have a very good effect when we worked from a primary source in these other webinars and took it through embryology. So we're going to start with that, and we're going to let it form, and then just work with the different organs through birth, through suckling, through different ages, and then just come to the organs. Well, you will be working with the organs as they are now in relationship to those times. And I think it makes it easier to clear the karma in these organs if we can take it back through conception to before conception. So whatever was going on before this life gets taken into account, however that affects you in the womb. And for a lot of people here, I know in recent times it's really been forbidden in a way for pregnant women to drink alcohol, but I don't know that that has been so long. And I think definitely if mothers are drinking alcohol through pregnancy, that will have a strong effect on this circuit with both the liver and the pancreas in this set of organs, and may lead to all sorts of different traits to do with this. I know with myself, Diraj just came up. I always had a pain under my left ribs, and he just came up and pressed on it one day and said, yeah, your mother tried to abort you with something to do with alcohol at 3 months. So I think whatever happens with my liver and pancreas can stem from that time. So there may be all sorts of issues that we know nothing about from previous lives, what was happening between our parents through whilst we're living in the womb, what was happening with our mother while we were living in the womb. All sorts of configurations can go on in that time that are beyond the intellect, because the intellect isn't formed at that stage. So it's no good trying to work it out with the intellect. It's just there as a karma or a feeling or a picture. So I think it gives it an extra potency to do that. So we'll be working with that. We'll be working the tongue, in a way, is the organ at the beginning of the GI tract, and easy to feel because it's got sensory nerves in it. It connects up the GI tract at one end, the gut and intestinal tract. We'll be working with the rectum at the other end, which again has sensory nerves in it and connects you into the digestion. We'll be working with the cerebellum and the brain, but the cerebellum really relates a lot to the cerebellum, and the central brain complex relate a lot to these nerves traveling through the face, and obviously holographic breathing has this whole movement, and that gives you a connection to the organs. You can't feel the organs unless you're aware of the brain. It's the same thing. So to be aware of the organs, you also have to be aware of the brain. So we'll be working with that. We'll be working with the kundalini in the spine. So as that energy is released, that can transform through the spine. So as the organs transform, the spine transforms, and the spine gives that relationship through the brain. So as the energies release in one form from the organs, released up through the spine and central nervous system into the brain, there's a place in the brain that has the same karma but on a higher level. And as it travels through the brain, it clears the mind orientation to whatever happened. It starts clearing the mind. It starts removing those different matrices. It's not like it creates new matrices. Some people say, oh, I've got to change the negative to the positive. This isn't that. This is clearing it out so there's nothing there. It's still mind, whether it's positive or negative. So this just clears the matrices, whether you consider them to be positive, negative, or whatever. I've always been a bit suspicious of creating positive mind dialogue, because for me, it's just more mind. You know, you've got the negative mind, and then you've actually now got some positive mind on top of it as well. My game has always been just get rid of that thing if you possibly can. And as these energies go through the brain, it does that. Rather than move through these matrices that we've built up from generations to generations, the energy just moves through the brain in relationship to the earth, the higher self, and in a natural way. So it's not part of our mind orientation, and it is neither positive or negative. And again, it's a tantra. It's that positive and negative coming together and merging or dissolving to create the light that connects to the higher self.